Let's get into this conversation now. As the new multi-party government, this is the government of national unity, gets down to work, a number of ministers have already made a number of pronouncements on changes they want to make in their various portfolios. But the minister in the presidency, Khumbudzo Ntshavheni, last week clarifying that no individual minister can make any policy decision without the buy-in from the whole of cabinet. Well, to help us unpack this process now, we're joined by governance expert Sandile Swana, who joins us via the virtual platform. Mr. Swana, good evening to you, and thank you very much for your time. I'm going to ask us first to listen to what the minister in the presidency had to say, just reminding the viewers what exactly the content of what she was saying was, and then we'll get deeper into this discussion. So let's just take a listen to this.
It should be stressed that both the president and individual ministers are duty-bound to take the cabinet issues of policy, significant decisions, such as decisions with financial consequences exceeding a department's approved budget, and any other matter the cabinet has decided should be referred to it. They must take those matters to cabinet. Failure to do so could undermine the validity of such a decision. So there is no single minister who can expropriate a decision of cabinet, or that is a policy decision, to themselves, because then that policy will not be valid in terms of the laws of the Republic, as indicated earlier, as provided for in the Constitution.
Mr. Swana, I hope that soundbite from Minister Ntshavheni was clear enough for all of us to understand. So just to set things straight here, the whole purpose of this discussion is for us to understand the process through which any government policy or any regulations that has not yet been approved, what is the process for it to get approved, and at which point does the minister make a public announcement around that particular decision? Are you able to outline this for us?
Yes. So thanks, Collie, and good evening to our viewers. The question that you are asking is actually written down and published for all members of parliament and members of the cabinet to read and to follow. So there are some basic documents that Ntshavheni has highlighted that are relevant to this discussion that must be used. So in short, in short, you have the medium-term strategic framework, and they have actually clarified that the DGs are now going to take the manifestos of the different political parties and construct the medium-term strategic framework. Now, that framework by itself is not only guided by manifestos. It must speak to the NDP that already exists. It must speak to the SADC master plan. It must speak to the AU Agenda 2063, the Constitution, and other master plans that already exist that are long-term plans of the government. So that things are not left stranded over the long term. After that, then that in itself, the MPs then have to prepare themselves when the president presents this to, then it goes to cabinet. Once the cabinet agrees to it, then it is presented by the president to parliament, and parliament needs to engage with that, critique it, and then it is finally agreed. Then it becomes what needs to be implemented. It is then supported by a budget. There is nothing that you can do in the state that has no budget, otherwise you enter in the realms of irregular expenditure, or that does not comply to existing laws or planning frameworks that already exist in the state, that are regulated in the state.
Yeah. So with the ministers that have made pronouncements in the recent past, whether it be the Home Affairs Minister, whether it be the Sports, Arts and Culture Minister, whether it be the Basic Education Minister, all of those pronouncements, how should we understand them at this point? Remember, Cabinet has yet to sit, if I am correct in my assumption, that that meeting has actually yet to sit that very first meeting. So should we understand what they have said as wishful thinking, or perhaps policy that is possibly being processed?
Yeah, so those cannot be final decisions at all. In as much as I have checked some of them, for instance, the Minister of Correctional Services about prisoners feeding themselves. When you study the documents of correctional services, you discover that, in fact, that is already an existing policy. So it has been done for quite a long time. Even the Minister of Electricity made a declaration about the nuclear power station and so on and so forth in terms of pre-existing plans. However, where the trick comes in is that nevertheless it must be in the strategic framework and in the budget. Otherwise, you are going to do something that has no authority to continue in the immediate period.
How important, therefore, will it be for the public, the ordinary man on the street, me, for example, to distinguish between what is said by a minister which appears and sounds to be new, and why is it important that the ministers themselves actually be responsible about this? Because at some point, it is going to mislead the public if they go out, publicly make pronouncements, when in actual fact, this has not been processed and approved by Cabinet.
Yes, Toli, unfortunately, we are going to struggle a lot. And the warnings that have been issued to ministers are correct. They should be issued, that ministers should refrain from that, because there's enough work, and the medium-term strategic framework is going to give them enough work anyway. So the problem that you and I have is that these ministers who are there, unfortunately, whether we like it or not, individually and severally, are already campaigning for 2026, and they are using their positions to project themselves as top performers so that their parties can gain advantage in 2026 and also in 2029. That has a likelihood of generating other problems later on, which I suppose are not the subject of this.
Well, you point to something that probably is going to be something, or it could be interpreted as possibly bringing an antagonistic behavior among ministers within this GNU, to a point where perhaps the president may even have to intervene at times. Where I'm going with this is, why is it that ministers should be called to order here so that they don't make public pronouncements? And if they do make a pronouncement about something that is yet to even be discussed in Cabinet, then they should make that clear so that the public is not fooled into thinking that this minister means business and indeed their intentions are pure.
Yes, there are already warnings that have been issued to all ministers, or as you can see in the clip that you shared this evening. The period is short. However, you know, some of them, unfortunately, may be new to the Cabinet altogether, and they are just excited. But it's a matter of maybe a few weeks before, by the end of the month, this will be an official document, a proper official document, and they need to discuss it that way. Yeah. However, what we are not going to be able to completely silence, even after the budget and the medium-term strategic framework has been proclaimed, I feel that these Cabinet ministers are going to be advertising not the GNU, not the performance of the GNU, the performance of themselves and their political parties, whereby you find that this Minister of Electricity now is already saying that this is not a federal government. So there is a degree of centralization of these powers in the presidency. and in the president themselves, so that people must obey and be coherent in how they are approaching this thing. But the opportunity is appealing. 2026 is not too far.
The opportunity is appealing. Perhaps as a final comment from you, how active should we expect the president to be, or at least his office through his officials, to say, this is not government policy, please refrain from doing this?
Yes, I think there will be a coordination of that, active coordination of that is very necessary. Because there are people with wild ideas. Fortunately, our policy and the documents that are listed are very rich. They are enough actually to create sufficient prosperity in South Africa. But there are people with other wild ideas that they've held for a long time. Now, with just a touch of power, then they are going to go wild. So the presidency has got to be sending those messages and notifications to say, no, that one is going to result in irregular expenditure. That one is not going to be allowed, and so on and so forth.
Sandile Swana, thank you very much for your time.